Welcome to our 2024 celebration of our winners of the Faces of American Innovation Award, which we give out every year. We are really honored to have a very special person to kick this off. If there's one person who I would say is the champion of Bayh-Dole in this Congress, it's Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts. He's somebody, as soon as his March-in Rights came out, which would undermine Bayh-Dole, it violates everything we tried to do, he stood up and not only opposed it, he actually authored a bipartisan letter. Now, if you haven't been in Washington very long, there are not many bipartisan letters on anything anymore, much less getting one on something like Bayh-Dole. But he not only did that, which told President Biden, this is a mistake. This is not only bad law, it's going to be bad for the country. And that took a lot of political courage. We didn't have a lot of people on both sides willing to do that. The other thing is, which is very unusual, is having a member of the House side walk all the way over to be with them on the Senate side is extremely unusual. But Congressman Auchincloss was a Marine in Afghanistan, so he's pretty good at showing up where his country needs him. So without any more introduction, I'd like to introduce Congressman Jake Auchincloss and have him kick off our event. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate the gracious introduction by Joe, and truly I appreciate your lifelong advocacy for this issue, obviously both inside the building and outside the building. It's truly a testament to your spirit of public service. I'm in my second term representing the suburbs of Boston, which means I represent a Bayh-Dole district. Working at some of the greatest research institutions and academic medical centers in the world, my constituents have propelled innovation in medical science and defense and materials and more. And just last year, just one of those universities filed for more than 600 patents across a range of applications. What comes next are game-changing companies, category-defining companies, from Moderna and mRNA to Commonwealth Fusion Systems in energy. Indeed, if I had to sum up the economic engine of Massachusetts in one sentence, it would be tech transfer from universities. Policymakers in the executive and the legislature must cultivate, not castigate, the law that transforms research into higher standards of living. Indeed, we in government must dedicate ourselves to public-private partnership for the advancement of innovation. And as we consider that public-private partnership, I would put forward that there are three roles of the federal government to consider as a partner to private sector innovation. The first is impact investor, the second is smart regulator, and the third is good customer. I'll talk a little bit about some of the policies that can inform each of those roles. I'm going to take the angle on biotechnology because it's an area that is especially relevant to my district and to Massachusetts, and also of personal interest and personal policy priorities. But I think you can extrapolate from these to other fields, from materials to defense and elsewhere. If we look, for example, at how the federal government can cultivate public-private partnership as an impact investor in biotechnology, the first, and I would argue maybe the most important thing, is increased funding for the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation. This funding is what propels peer-reviewed, curiosity-driven research. And I get into this mostly friendly debate with my Republican colleagues on the Select Committee on China constantly. They are so concerned that China's going to steal our science, and as though we have like science in a lockbox somewhere in MIT, and they're going to take it. And my argument to them is our biggest problem is not corporate espionage or IP theft. And yes, we have to be, we have to be on guard. Our biggest threat is that we're not going to have any science left to steal in 10 years. It's the Chinese who are making the investments in their basic research enterprise, whereas in real terms, our NIH and NSF funding as a percentage of GDP has gone down over the last quarter century. After World War II, we were funding 5–6% of GDP going to R&D, either in the private or public sector. We're now at like 2, maybe generously 3% right now, and heading downwards again. You look at South Korea, you look at Taiwan, you look at Israel, countries that are powerhouses of R&D, they're at 5, 6, 7%. We are so far behind, and the investments that we make in scientists, by the way, most of whom, not most of whom, but many of whom are immigrants, pays huge returns for us as a country. along with that funding for the National Science Foundation and the NIH, we should also be exploring, I think, reforms to NIH funding to reward higher risk contrarian research. I think there's been a reasonable set of criticisms levied against the NIH that in recent years, its funding protocols have really rewarded incremental research. And you hear a lot of investigators say that to get that first K1, they have to kind of have a very clearly laid out plan of action that sort of reflects what's already been sort of decided as the next step to take. And that stuff's important, but you also want interdisciplinary, contrarian, mid-career pivoting kind of research that maybe doesn't work most of the time. That's the whole point, but sometimes it does, and it opens up new fields of endeavor. Of course, as an impact investor, to return the rewards of the basic research, we got to protect intellectual property. And that means not undermining Bayh-Dole from recent misguided interpretations on march-in authority. And I see this, of course, in Massachusetts, that the ability of universities to translate basic research into commercialized endeavors is so much of what creates the virtuous cycle and the eds and meds ecosystem that has made Massachusetts, on the economic development front, one of the most successful states in the union. Let me move to the second role that government can play in the public-private partnership for innovation, and that is as a smart regulator. In industries like biotechnology that have 10, 15, 20-year timelines for commercialization and have to make long-term capital bets, what they really want is just knowing that the rules of the game aren't going to change. Again, why march-in is such a counterproductive idea. March-in is sort of the definition of changing the rules of the game halfway through, and you're already seeing a chilling effect on some commercial interest in university tech transfer endeavors. But it applies even more broadly than that. And I think one opportunity here is to look at the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology's recommendations for streamlining the coordinated framework for the regulation of biotechnology. We have a multitude of agencies that get involved when there are biologically derived products, from the FDA to the USDA to the EPA to the DOD, and they all have a role to play there, but they're not as coordinated as that term coordinated framework might imply. And I think what that is creating is a problem of what's been called SEP, or SCP, someone else's problem, where I think there's a multitude of regulators who are thinking it's someone else's problem, and that means nothing gets done. We have sort of a tragedy of the commons, or a diffusion of responsibility. We need, I think, a clearinghouse and an air traffic controller for biotech regulation that can create swim lanes of authority and be accountable to Congress and to the president and also to industry for clear, certain, and predictable regulations. And I'll close with this idea of the federal government as a good customer. And I think this sometimes gets overlooked. But again, particularly in biotechnology, one of the roles the federal government has is that we just buy a lot of it. We buy a lot of biopharmaceutical products, and increasingly through the BioPreferred program, we buy a lot of biologically derived products in general. And we need to look at how to make sure that CMS, through reasonable and necessary standards, through its rules on market exclusivity and how it negotiates, that we are creating market certainty for innovators so that they know that they can sell what they're creating in the long term. And this applies to all fields of innovation. I hear this also for the Defense Department, that there's like 17 different offices across the Defense Department. They're all trying to be the Office of Strategic Capital and the investor in this and the investor in that. And sometimes the best thing to do is just buy what you say you're going to buy in big quantities reliably. Just be a customer. You don't have to be an investor. There's tons of investors in America. Federal government can just buy stuff. And I think that's going to be a critical role as we see that biologics can be applied well beyond just pharmaceuticals. It's going to be a game changer in agriculture. It's going to be a game changer in materials. It's potentially a game changer in manufacturing. The government's going to have a point of view about how it buys stuff. And it could be a tremendous opportunity actually to induce economic development across the country. Because if we have a BioPreferred program, we're playing to our own strengths as a country in rebuilding an element of our manufacturing base that has atrophied over the last quarter century. So Bayh-Dole is an important thread that runs through, I think, all three important government roles in inducing a public-private partnership for innovation. Government as an impact investor, government as a smart regulator, and government as a good customer. And going forward, I hope that the bipartisan support that sustained Bayh-Dole in its inception remains to protect it and to allow it to continue to be the most impactful pro-innovation law of the last 50 years. Thanks for having me.
If you feel cynical about politics and you feel there's really no hope, you just saw an example of what a political leader actually is. That's the person, I think, no matter what your political partisanship is, if we had more people like that in Congress, the country would be a lot better off. So we really do appreciate having him come by.